San Diego State. So all those teams in the American, they're like, hey, we got to beat this team. They made it. They returned all their starters. So, I think Dusty May and them, I think they're just waiting it out, trying to make it to the tournament, which is a dangerous game to play because we've seen teams kind of, for lack of a better reason, they've half-assed the season and thought that they just make it into the tournament, and they do, and then they get, ran out of the building in round one or round two. So I'm not saying that's going to happen to FAU, and I sure hope it doesn't, but the way it's going right now wouldn't surprise me. So, that's just something to think about as we move forward in the and we're going to discuss the bracketology later in this podcast. But nevertheless, another big time program, Duke, had a pretty good week, and then yesterday occurred, and they lost to Pitt in Cameron Indoor Stadium, and I didn't think that they'd lose to Pitt. I remember they were struggling a little early, and then all of a sudden they just, Pitt just kept fighting back, and this coming off the heels of, on January 9th, Duke played Pitt in Pitt, and Duke won by 22 for reference. And then earlier in the week, Pitt also lost to Syracuse by 11 to fall to 1-5 in ACC play. And then all of a sudden, just came alive. By the way, their one ACC victory in conference play was to Louisville. Shout out to you, Nick, and Kenny Payne. But so for them to come in to Duke, we already said it's already hard enough to win on the road, and win, that is just surprising. I don't know if y'all have any comments on that, but I mean, like, I sure as heck didn't predict this. I mean, Pitt beating Duke after Duke, had a pretty good week. Like I said, beat Georgia. I mean, they won by 5 against Georgia Tech, but I mean, Georgia Tech's kind of weird. And, it really looked like Duke had gotten their stuff together as they were on a long winning streak. I mean, their only other loss before this loss to Pitt was on December 2nd. Can you believe that? December 2nd, before that it was on that same Wednesday as to Arkansas. So, Duke's kind of in some tough territory. I'm not sure if anyone would like to add on to that, but I'll open the floor to discussion about Duke basketball.
Yeah, I can. So obviously that's a rough loss. You mentioned very astutely, TP, that road conference wins are hard to come by, and that makes it even more important to hold serve at home, just because you know that it's going to be tough every time you leave. So especially when you're playing against a team that's generally considered to be an inferior opponent at home, it really ups the pressure to hold serve, and Duke didn't do that. And I expected Duke's struggles early in the season. I expected a loss like the Georgia Tech one that they had back in December. Was it December or November?
It was
And
December 2nd. December 2nd.
Okay, yeah. So I expected something like that because apart from Kyle Filipowski, they're not a very experienced team. They're a very young but very talented team. And so, you expect with a team like that, especially in a program like Duke, that they're going to start the season a little rough and then they're going to improve as they go. But I was not expecting issues like this deep into the season. And I think it speaks a little bit to, I know he's been there a couple of years now, but the learning curve for John Shire at head coach. I think, I mean, this is easy to say, but I think if Mike Krzyzewski's there, that loss doesn't happen, because I think this is just a young team and a young coach who are kind of trying to get the feel of things and not quite there yet. But I will say that I do think they have a lot of promising pieces. And I still do, even despite this, think that they have a very promising path forward, to maybe do something similar to what they did last year and have a strong run heading into March, get up to a pretty high seed. And, the tournament was pretty wild last year, but maybe even make a run in the tournament. Who knows?
Yeah, I think Brett's done a really good job recapping Duke basketball and kind of like what's been going on these last few weeks with them. And I agree. I mean, I think they haven't really been the clear front runner in the ACC just due to a lack of experience this year, but they've had some close wins in ACC play that have kind of overshadowed the fact that they've been maybe a little less dominant or a little less experienced than years past. I think this next week and a half before that game in Chapel Hill, Monday night on the 29th, is going to tell us a lot about this team. So they have three of their more winnable games in ACC play ahead. They're going up to Louisville on Tuesday night, so that'll be an interesting game for sure. I'll have my thoughts and analysis on that for next week. But I personally believe Duke needs to have an inspired performance there. And then they have Clemson at home next weekend. And actually, I take that back. They're not playing North Carolina for another 2 weeks almost. They're playing them at Chapel Hill on Saturday night, 2 weeks from now. But those games at Louisville against Clemson at home and then at Virginia Tech and Blacksburg are huge for the Blue Devils. Just to show that they have that resolve after a tough home defeat against Pitt. Because if they go out and lose 2 out of these next 3 games that are supposed to be 3 of their easier ACC games, I don't think they can be considered more than a 6, 7, 8 seed come March, even if they bounce back later in the year.
Well, good deal. I think we got our Duke basketball out of the way. And before I hand the floor over to y'all, I just want to take a second to talk about the great game that we were all witness to yesterday between Creighton and Seton Hall. Went into triple overtime. Blue Jays got the victory over the Pirates up in Newark. It was a really good game of basketball. Could have gone either way. Shout out to those two programs. Seton Hall's looked pretty good this year. I'm really impressed. I think if they keep it up, I mean, I think that was a really important win. Like we said, really important to get those home victories. I think that was really important towards tournament play and, of course, conference seeding. So the Pirates dropped that one and Creighton gets the victory. But, guys, I'm going to hand it over before we continue our next discussion. Any teams that we haven't discussed yet that you got on your mind, you just want to talk about for a second? It doesn't matter how big it is, doesn't matter how small it is, doesn't matter how bad they are. I'm gonna turn it over to y'all.
I mean, I've got one. I do want to save it for the next segment, I think. So I'll pass it off to anybody else.
Okay, well, I will go. I got one on my mind. Gonzaga. What the heck happened? They've just been bad. Someone said it. I remember I asked, is Gonzaga frauds? And we all agree they are. They're not good. They are not good this year. We said on the podcast a couple weeks ago that Gonzaga is going to rule it. And while I think they could, I think they're just not good. Like, I just don't. St. Mary's is still undefeated in conference play. Whenever Gonzaga plays St. Mary's, it's always good. But Gonzaga dropped the game to Santa Clara. First time Santa Clara had beaten Gonzaga since 2011, for reference, or it's 2010, 2011. It's 2011. So they've just really disappointed me this year. I enjoy watching late night basketball. Gonzaga is the king of late night basketball, and they've just looked bad. I mean, they're doing well and they're bad and they're bad. Excuse me. They've done well after that. I mean, they destroyed Pepperdine, whoopee, and they destroyed San Diego, whoopee. They'll do that every year. But this week, though, Thursday, they're hosting San Francisco. And San Francisco is not bad. They're not great. They're 63rd in KenPom, and they just lost to St. Mary's. But that's a game I'd watch out for. But Gonzaga, they play St. Mary's at home on February 3rd. And so I'm sure we'll have something going on about that. But that's the one that I really want to talk about, as I think they've just been a big old disappointment this year. Well, anyway, I don't think anyone else has anything else to say. So now we're going to do a segment. Who is a contender and who is a pretender? We ask this question every single year. Feels like, excuse me. It feels like we have this being asked all throughout the year, and it doesn't really get answered until, it's March. But it's always fun to debate it. So I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to start off with you, Brett. I want you to give me one contender, one pretender, and why.
All right. Yeah, let's go. So I'm going to start off with a team that actually I think is kind of on a downward slope right now. They haven't been looking their best, but I still maintain that they're a contender, and that team is Arizona. I'm not a huge fan of Arizona personally, but I think that they have the pieces. I think that they have the elite guard play. I think they have the size. I think they have the depth, and I think they have the coaching to end up ultimately, come March, you're going to need to string together 6 solid games. And I think that they would require a bit of a shooting hot streak to do it. But at that point, I think that they really have a shot for that. And then pretender, I'm going to go to Tennessee. I have a couple reasons for this. The first one, as I also touched on last week, was Rick Barnes. I do not think that he is a coach that is capable of winning a championship. I think that his abilities in terms of player development and in terms of game coaching down the stretch just leave too much to be desired for them to be a real contender. But also just in terms of the pieces they have, their size is decent. Their guard play is pretty good. They have one really phenomenal player in Dalton Connect, and I think that they are too reliant on him. I think that when they come to play high-level games, they need him to score 30 or they won't win. And in March, you play high-level games, and he's not going to score 36 times. So that is who I've got for my contender and pretender.
I will go ahead with my contender and pretender next. So my contender, I think it's a pretty easy choice out of the ACC. I've got the North Carolina Tar Heels. So they're 7-0 in ACC play right now, and that may not seem like much in this current ACC. They don't really have any impressive wins in conference. But what I will say is their performance outside of conference with a few close losses against UConn and Kentucky, as well as a non-conference win against Tennessee. I know Brett said they were pretenders, Tennessee, but I'm going to stick with my contender pick for UNC based on their recent performance. I think this ACC sets up really well for them to go 16-2 in this conference, even with a few stumbles. I think they are a clear contender, despite the fact that they're not necessarily being tested in conference. I think come March, they can still make a deep run based on Hubert Davis's experience in March with his first year in March. I know he doesn't have that same pedigree that a lot of other Hall of Fame coaches have, but they do have a lot of talent still from Roy Williams' teams like Armando Bacot. And then my pretender right now, I think it's a pretty easy choice as well. I'm going to go with the Ole Miss Rebels after their large defeat at the hands of the Auburn Tigers. So Ole Miss was undefeated heading into conference play, and they've stumbled a little bit out of the gate. They had a really soft non-conference schedule, and they've lost their 3 biggest tests in conference play, with all of them coming on the road. And if you can't win on the road against a solid team, I mean, they lost to LSU on the road, and that's a middle of the pack team at best in the SEC, probably lower mid of the pack. If we're being honest, I think this is an Ole Miss team